There's a particular kind of silence that falls over a dinner table when something has gone irreversibly wrong. Not the silence of a misunderstanding, not the silence of an awkward pause. The silence of a room that has just witnessed something it cannot unhear and does not know what to do with yet. That silence fell at 8:47 on a Saturday evening in the dining room of the house on Elmwood Drive in Atlanta, Georgia. Marcus Webb was standing at the head of the table. His coat was already on. His bag was already in his hand. 8 dinner guests sat around the table that Courtney had spent 3 days arranging. The good china, the crystal, the flowers flown in from shop in Buckhead that charge more per arrangement than most people spend on groceries in a month. The food was still warm. Marcus looked at his wife once. She was sitting at the other end of the table with an expression that had not yet caught up to what was happening. Then he turned and walked out of the dining room without looking back. Behind him, nobody spoke. That was the end of the evening. 6 hours earlier, Marcus had been running. He ran the same 4-mile loop through the neighborhood every morning at 5 o'clock regardless of the season, regardless of what was scheduled for the day ahead. He had run it in December rain and August heat, and on the morning his father died, when he had laced his shoes in the hospital parking lot at 4:30 and run the loop twice, because once was not enough to process what the day was going to require of him. He had been running this loop for 7 years. He knew every crack in the pavement, every corner where the streetlights were unreliable, every house whose dog would hear him and bark once and then be quiet. This particular Saturday morning, he ran at once, at his usual pace, and at the final turn, the one that curved back toward Elmwood Drive and the house, he did not slow down the way he normally did. He maintained his pace all the way to the front gate, stopped, put his hands on his knees, and breathed for a long time. Then he went inside, showered, and put on the dark suit Courtney had laid out on the bed for the evening. He adjusted the pocket square in his breast pocket, a small square of dark burgundy silk, slightly faded at one corner from years of folding. It had belonged to his father, Arthur Webb, who had worn it to every significant event of his life. His wedding, the births of his children, every job interview he had ever dressed for, the day he finally paid off the house in Macon where Marcus had grown up. Arthur had pressed it into Marcus's hand at the hospital and said nothing. He had not needed to say anything. Marcus touched the edge of it, the way he always did before a formal occasion, and went downstairs to help Courtney finish preparing for the dinner. Marcus Webb was the founding managing partner of Webb Capital, a private equity fund he had built over 11 years from a single-floor office in Midtown Atlanta into a $340 million operation with investments across healthcare, logistics, and renewable energy. He had built it quietly, without the kind of public profile that some fund managers cultivated, because his father had taught him that the noise you made was inversely proportional to the work you did, and he had found no reason to revise that principle. He had met Courtney Hargrove at a charity gala 5 years ago. She was the daughter of a prominent Atlanta real estate family. Old Georgia money, the kind that had been old for long enough that it had stopped thinking about what it was and simply assumed it was the standard against which other things were measured. Courtney was warm and quick and had a talent for making people feel at ease in a room. Marcus had loved her in the real way, not the convenient way. The problems had not announced themselves. They had arrived the way most things that damage a marriage arrive. Incrementally and without a specific date, he could have pointed to afterward and said, that was when it started. It started with the way she introduced him at her family's events. Not Marcus Webb, not my husband, just Marcus, with a particular vocal inflection that made him sound like an accessory she was fond of rather than a person she had chosen to build a life with. It continued in the way she talked about his work. When her family asked what he did, she would say something like he works in finance, and then immediately change the subject, as though the specifics were either too complicated or too unimportant to explain to people who would have understood them perfectly well if she had tried. It deepened in the specific tone she used when her parents were in the room, a tone that contained within it a managing quality, as though Marcus's presence in those rooms was something that required careful stewardship rather than simple belonging. The tone of a white woman who had married a black man she genuinely loved and had not noticed, somewhere along the way, that she had begun treating his presence in her world as something to be curated rather than shared. He had noticed all of it. He had said nothing. He had told himself, for longer than he should have, that he was being too sensitive, that the pattern was not as deliberate as it felt, that she loved him and the rest was noise. His friend Damon had seen it from the beginning. Damon Pierce had known Marcus since their undergraduate years at Morehouse. He was one of 2 black men at the dinner that Saturday evening, and the only one besides Marcus who had been in that house often enough to watch the pattern build itself into a structure over time. He had tried to say something once in the second year of the marriage. Marcus had asked him not to. Damon had respected that and said nothing further. And had spent 3 more years watching from the specific vantage point a man who has been asked to stay quiet about something he cannot stop seeing, who watches his friend absorb the particular cruelty of being made to feel like a guest in his own life, and who knows, with the quiet certainty of shared experience, exactly what that kind of treatment costs a black man over time.
The guests arrived at 7 o'clock. 8 of them. 3 couples from Courtney's family orbit, Damon and his wife, and a colleague of Courtney's from the philanthropic board she served on. The table had been arranged so that Marcus sat one end and Courtney at the other, which was a kind of seating arrangement that looked elegant in photographs and communicated to anyone paying close attention, who considered the room their natural domain. Dinner was served at 7:45. The conversation moved in the way it always moved at Courtney's dinners, through the safe channels of real estate travel and the kind of social commentary that sounds incisive but requires no one in the room to actually change their position on anything. Marcus was quiet for most of the first course. He listened. He observed. He had learned long ago that the most useful information about any environment came not from what people said, but from the space between what they said and what they actually meant. It was during the second course that Marcus began telling a story. The conversation had moved to investment trends. One of the husbands at the table worked in commercial banking and had asked a question about private equity performance in the current rate environment. Marcus knew this topic the way most people know the layout of their own home, instinctively, without having to think. He began to answer, and the answer became a story about a deal his firm had just closed, a healthcare logistics company in Birmingham that had grown its revenue by 40% in 18 months under Web Capital's operational guidance. He was 2 sentences in. Courtney put her fork down. She said, "Oh, Marcus, nobody wants to hear about work." She said it with the particular brightness of someone who believes they are lightening the mood rather than terminating a conversation. Then she turned to the table and said, "Tell them about the time you got lost hiking in Wyoming. That one is actually funny." The table laughed. Not all of them, and not hard, but enough. The automatic social laughter of people who follow the lead of whoever appears to be in charge of the room's emotional temperature. Marcus stopped speaking. He looked at Courtney. She was already moving on, already telling the story herself since Marcus had gone quiet. Her voice carrying the ease of someone who has no idea they have just done something that cannot be undone. Damon, sitting 3 seats to Marcus's left, did not laugh. He set his fork down very carefully and looked at the tablecloth. His wife, who had been watching Marcus's face, did the same. 3 days earlier, on a Wednesday afternoon, Marcus had sat in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Atlanta with his attorney, Nadine Foster. Nadine was a black woman who had handled his affairs for 4 years, his fund documents, his personal estate planning, and for the past 8 months, a quiet and careful review of the marital asset structure that Marcus had asked her to undertake without urgency and without announcement. He had not told Nadine what specifically was coming. He had simply said that he wanted to be prepared, and that if he ever sent her a text message containing only the word ready, he needed the formal separation notice filed before the following morning. Nadine had asked no questions. She had said she would be prepared. Marcus had driven home from that Wednesday meeting, changed into his running clothes, and run his 4-mile loop twice in the dark. He had come back inside and made dinner for himself and Courtney, who arrived home late and did not ask how his day had been. He had not yet sent the message. He had not been planning the dinner as the moment. He had simply reached across those early morning runs and those silent evenings, a threshold that he recognized the way you recognize the edge of something you have been walking toward for a long time. Not with drama, but with the particular subtle clarity of a man who has stopped asking himself if he is certain and found that he is. Courtney was still talking. She had finished a hiking story. The table had laughed warmly, and she had settled back into her chair with a satisfied expression of a woman who had managed her evening well. She reached for her wine. She looked down the length of the table at Marcus, who had not spoken since she interrupted him, and gave him the small smile she used when she believed she had navigated something gracefully. She was not worried. She had never been worried about Marcus in moments like this one. He absorbed things. She had come to rely on this in the years since their marriage. His stillness, his refusal to make scenes, the way he could sit inside a room that was not entirely comfortable for him and give nothing away. She had never considered that this quality was not the same as acceptance. She had never considered that a man who has learned to be quiet in certain rooms has not learned to be small in them, that silence and surrender are not the same thing, and that the gap between them, when it closes without warning. She was certain that by dessert, Marcus would have found his way back to Pleasant. He always did. He was that kind of man. She raised her wine glass slightly toward him. a small private toast that communicated affection across a crowded table. Marcus looked at her. His right hand moved to his breast pocket. His fingers found the edge of the dark burgundy silk. His father's pocket square, faded at one corner, worn smooth from decades of folding and unfolding. He thought about Arthur pressing it into his hand at the hospital. He thought about the final turn on the 4-mile loop that morning and the way he had not slowed down. She was still smiling when Marcus straightened his chair and opened his mouth to speak. And the room, without knowing why yet, went very quiet. Not one person at that table reached for their glass. Not one person continued a side conversation. The chandelier light caught the crystal and the china and the flowers from Buckhead, and all of it sat very still, waiting. Marcus looked at Courtney the way a man looks at someone he has loved carefully and honestly for 5 years, and has finally stopped pretending to himself that the love alone is enough to hold the weight of everything else. He said 5 words.
He said them quietly, without anger, without performance. He said them the way you state a fact that has been true for longer than the room around you understands. He said, "My attorney has the papers." Then he stood. He adjusted his jacket. He touched the pocket square once, briefly, the way his father used to before walking into any room that required his full dignity. And he walked out. Behind Marcus, the dining room stayed quiet for a long time. Courtney's smile held for approximately 4 seconds after the sound of the front door closing reached the table. Then it collapsed, not dramatically, not into tears, but into the specific blankness of a person whose internal model of situation has just been completely invalidated and who has not yet built a replacement. She set her wine glass down. One of the guests, a woman named Patricia from Courtney's philanthropic board, reached across and touched Courtney's arm. She said something quietly. Courtney did not appear to hear it. Damon Pierce was already standing. He excused himself briefly, told his wife he would be right back, and walked to the front of the house. The door was still ajar. He stepped onto the porch. Marcus was at the bottom of the front steps, coat on, bag over his shoulder, facing the street. He had not called a car yet. He was simply standing there in the October air with his hands at his sides, looking at the neighborhood he had run through at 5 o'clock that morning. Damon stood at the top of the steps. He did not go down. He did not ask Marcus if he was all right. He had known Marcus for 22 years and understood that this was not a moment that required that question. He said, "I've got it from here. Go." Marcus nodded once. He flagged a car. He got in. He did not look back at the house. From the driveway, while the car was pulling away, Marcus took out his phone. He opened a text thread with a contact saved under a single name, Nadine. He typed one word, "Ready." He sent it and put the phone in his pocket. Nadine Foster received the message at 8:52 on a Saturday evening. She was at home, reading, as she often was on weekend evenings, a habit she maintained with the same discipline she brought to the rest of her professional life, which was the discipline of a black woman who had spent 21 years in Atlanta's legal system, understanding that preparation was not a preference, but a survival strategy. She had been Marcus's attorney for 4 years. She had prepared the separation documents 8 months ago. She had updated them 3 days ago, after their Wednesday meeting, to reflect the current state of every asset in the marital structure. She read the word. She set her book down. She opened her laptop. By 11:15 that night, the formal separation notice had been drafted, reviewed, and prepared for filing the following morning the moment the courthouse opened. The marital asset review, which Nadine had spent 8 months constructing with the methodical patience of someone building a case that would not be contested, was attached. It documented the Webb Capital Fund as Marcus's premarital asset, established with full legal clarity before the marriage began. The house on Elmwood Drive, purchased during the marriage but financed entirely from Webb Capital's operating income, was also documented in detail. Nadine closed her laptop at 11:23. She poured herself a glass of water. She stood in her kitchen for a moment, thinking about the kind of courage that looks, from the outside, like composure. Then she went to bed. Marcus spent that night at the house of his college friend Jerome, who asked no questions and put fresh towels in the guest room and made coffee at 5:30 in the morning because he had heard Marcus lace up his shoes. At 5:45, Marcus ran his 4-mile loop. He ran it in the unfamiliar neighborhood around Jerome's house, which required him to pay attention to new streets rather than running on memory. At the final turn, a different street, a different corner, a different set of houses. He did not hesitate. He kept running. He found his way back by instinct and arrived at Jerome's front door breathing hard and completely clear in a way that he had not been completely clear in a very long time. He showered. He drank the coffee Jerome had left. He sent 3 messages. one to Nadine confirming the morning filing, one to his assistant at Web Capital asking her to reschedule his Monday morning calls by 2 hours, and one to Damon that said only, "Thank you for last night." Damon replied within a minute, 22 years. You never had to ask. Courtney called Marcus 9 times between Saturday night and Sunday morning. He did not answer any of them. On Sunday afternoon, she sent a text message that was 7 sentences long. He read it once and did not reply. Her parents called. His phone registered the call, and he watched it arrive and then watched it stop. He did not call back. On Sunday evening, Marcus drove to the house on Elmwood Drive. He had called Courtney's sister beforehand to let her know he was coming and to ask that Courtney not be there. He arrived at a house that was quiet and still, the good china from Saturday's dinner presumably washed and replaced, the flowers from Buckhead already starting to turn at the edges. He went directly to the study on the second floor. He was not there for his clothes or his files or the objects that constituted the daily infrastructure of his life. Those could be retrieved later through the appropriate channels with the appropriate professional buffers in place. He was there for 3 things. The first was a photograph of his father taken in 1987, standing outside the house in Macon on the day the mortgage was paid off. Arthur was wearing his good suit. He was not smiling, exactly, but his posture communicated something that Marcus had spent his whole life trying to understand and had finally, at 41, begun to recognize in himself. The second was a small wooden box his father had given him on his wedding day, which contained 2 things: a letter Arthur had written to Marcus and told him not to read until he needed to, and a second pocket square, identical to the one Marcus had been wearing on Saturday night, dark burgundy silk, bought in a pair from the same shop in Macon 30 years ago. The third was a worn copy of a James Baldwin essay collection that had been on Arthur's shelf since the 1970s and that Marcus had read for the first time at 17 and had been reading ever since.
He carried all 3 downstairs. He put them in his bag. He set the house key on the kitchen counter. Not dramatically, not with a note. Simply set it down on the clean surface the way you set down something you are done carrying. He drove back to Jerome's house. The separation notice was filed at 9:03 on Monday morning. Courtney's attorney called Nadine's office at 10:45. The conversation, Nadine would later tell Marcus, was shorter than she had expected. The asset documentation was thorough enough that there was very little productive ground for the other side to contest. Within the week, the formal process had begun moving with the quiet, procedural efficiency of something that had been properly prepared for. Web Capital continued. Marcus continued. He ran his 4-mile loop every morning at 5 o'clock. Now through Jerome's neighborhood while he found a new residence. Navigating the streets, he was still learning with the methodical patience of a man who understands that new routes eventually become familiar ones if you are willing to pay attention. 6 weeks after the dinner, a journalist from an Atlanta business publication was writing a profile of Web Capital and asked Marcus, during what was supposed to be a question about his fund performance, how he approached long-term decisions, how he knew when a situation had run its full course and it was time to move. Marcus thought about it for a moment. He thought about a 4-mile loop and a turn he had not slowed down at. He thought about a small square of dark burgundy silk. He said, "My father used to say that the clearest decisions are the ones you have already made before you know you have made them. By the time you say the words out loud, you have been ready for longer than you realize. The words are just a confirmation." He picked up his coffee. He did not say anything further. 6 weeks after the dinner, on a cold Saturday morning in November, Damon stood outside Jerome's house waiting for Marcus to finish his run. He had not planned to be there. He had driven by on his way somewhere else. Seen Marcus turn the corner at the end of the block with a particular stride of man who has found his pace again, and pulled over without thinking about it. He watched Marcus come down the street. Marcus saw him. He raised one hand. Damon looked at his friend. At the coat, the steady breathing, the way he moved through that neighborhood like he had always belonged to it. He thought about Saturday night, about the table and the good china and Courtney's smile and what it looked like when it collapsed. He thought about 5 words said quietly in front of 8 people who would be telling that story for the rest of their lives. He thought about 22 years of knowing a man and watching that man decide, in the end, that he was done being quiet in rooms that were not built to hold him. Marcus reached the front of Jerome's house and stopped. He put his hands on his knees. He breathed. Damon said, "How was the run?" Marcus said, "Good." He straightened. He looked at the street, still a little unfamiliar, still requiring attention. Then he said, "The neighborhood is starting to make sense." Damon nodded. He got back in his car. He rolled the window down. He said, "He would have been proud of you." Marcus looked at him for a moment. He touched his breast pocket. The corner of the burgundy silk visible above the zipper of his running jacket, always there, always the same faded edge at the corner. Nadine Foster filed the last document in the case on a Tuesday afternoon 4 months after the dinner. She sat at her desk for a moment after hitting send, looking at the screen the way you look at something you have completed with care and are quietly satisfied by. She had been a black woman practicing law in Atlanta for 21 years. She had seen a specific kind of case that Marcus has represented, not dramatic in a courtroom sense, but significant in the way that things are significant when they involve a person finally choosing themselves after a long period of choosing not to. She thought briefly about the word he had sent her on a Saturday night. Ready? One word. After months of preparation, after all the careful, unhurried work of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, and had simply been waiting for the right moment to confirm it. She closed the completed file. She moved on. There is a thing that happens to black men in America that nobody writes enough about. It is not the loud cruelty, the cruelty that announces itself and can be named and contested and documented. It is the quiet kind, the kind that arrives in the vocal inflection of an introduction at a family dinner, the kind that lives in the gap between what a man has built and what the room around him is willing to see, the kind that, over enough years, can make a man who has built a $340 million company from a single office in Midtown Atlanta feel, in certain rooms, like a guest in his own life. Marcus Webb had spent 5 years in one of those rooms. He had absorbed it with a particular stillness that black men in America learn early, the stillness that is not weakness, that is not surrender, that is a specific discipline of a person who understands that making a scene in certain spaces costs more than it recovers. But stillness is not permanence. And there's always, if you're paying attention, a final turn on the loop where you do not slow down. Marcus had found his. He knew first. If this story stayed with you, share with someone who needs to hear what it looks like when a man decides, quietly and completely, that he is done. And tell me in the comments, who do you think was braver? Marcus for leaving or Damon for watching and saying nothing until it was time? I will see you in the next story.